You've seen them in the movies, you have seen everybody talking about them. They're something that is used to communicate with the other side. They're called spirit boards. Some people know them as Ouija boards. Everybody has an opinion about them. There is no doubt about that. But this evening, we're going to talk about spirit boards and delve into a little bit more of the better side of them, not the evil side that Hollywood has made them out to be. Joining me to do that this evening is horror author and spirit board user KB Hurst. How you doing this evening?
Lovely. How are you?
I'm doing awesome.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you being here. You and I have spoken about spirit boards, I probably more times than I can count. However, I still find people really asking questions and talking about them and not understanding what
Right.
they are or how they're used or why they're not such an evil thing that people pretend them to be. So, the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look. There's just people need to understand this is an oracle board, a spirit board, the Ouija board, and before I even go and say it again, what is the piece that is used that goes on the board?
A planchette.
Thank you. My brain just wants to go off and call it something else altogether. But these are what people will typically see in either that aspect, or if they go to the store to buy one, they would see one that is just the Ouija board. Now, Ouija boards, if I'm not mistaken, were started out as a game from a game company way back when, and it was a trademark kind of thing, a Ouija board. It's they were not known 200 years ago as a Ouija board. They were a spirit board, right?
Correct.
So tell me a little bit about spirit boards.
Well, I personally I started getting into them over about 25 years ago. And so I did some research because I was just curious and the person that had shown me how to use the board had never really given it much thought. She had just always been able to
Mm-hmm.
use it. And it originated in China. I forget what year, something BC. And they were using like stone on like a wheel, and they would have the marks in the ground, and then they would just kind of roll over the letters, but they were rolling them, like standing up with pushing them with a like some kind of roller. And so they were getting messages from spirit then. The board itself didn't start until spiritualism started. I think it was like sometime in the late 1800s, might have been a little bit before that. But then it started going more into a game around the 60s and 70s until the board game company, I think it was Hasbro, had burnt down in Salem, Massachusetts, because you can still go to the Ouija board building and see where it was at, see where it had burnt down at. So it originated as a game in Salem, Massachusetts, but then they had changed over names, copyright infringements happened.
Hmm.
And so now you'll see Ouija or Ouija, some people call it, which means yes in French and no in German. So it's like Ouija. But they had, once it became a game, it became more familiarized with people, whether it be in movies, horror movies like The Exorcist. There's been other movies. I think there was what was it? Amityville horror movie, the one with Meg Ryan. She's using a spirit board to
Mm-hmm.
try to communicate with a spirit. Stranger Things, they made a big wall of lights to try to communicate with one of the characters that were stuck in another um, region, like a vortex of some kind. And so you see them, they've always been a part of our lives in some capacity, but they're kind of like cobblestones or the rats that live under the tunnels. They've been there, but we don't think about them on the onset because they have such negative connotation, mainly from I hate to say it, but a lot of Christians believe that anything that's not of the Bible is evil. So respectfully, I don't get into arguments with anyone that I grew up Baptist. I know what my limits are. But with spirituality, people have learned that there's many different ways to use the board for communication. And also there have been teachers that have learned to use the board or some capacity of a board to teach autistic children how to communicate just by pointing to the letters on the board. So not everything associated with the Ouija board is bad. It is simply a tool. That's all
Hmm.
it is. Most people that are able to communicate with a spirit, they don't realize it, but it's really just a conduit. It's just something that they might be the conduit, but this is just the tool so that they can see it. I don't need my Ouija board anymore, but I prefer to use it because I'm a very visual person. I like to see the letters and them spell things out to me. But overall, Ouija board has been around for hundreds of years in some capacity. So I actually got into Ouija boards, I think it was in 2002 was when I got into it. And then shortly thereafter, I started making them and selling them or giving them away to friends. I'm an artsy person by nature, and I just liked being able to pick different themes to utilize. But overall, they've been around forever, in some capacity, whether it was just, turning over a shot glass and just going yes or no on a bar. I've never done that before, but I've seen people in movies do it.
Oh, now
But yeah, so.
you mentioned that you were making them and
Mhm.
selling them, which I find rather kind of cool. Would you advocate people using these if they've never used a spirit board before? Would you advocate that they use it by themselves or in a group of people?
I would personally, I would just tell the person to do research. And my how-to guide for using a Ouija board doesn't necessarily mean you have to have someone with you, because when you think about even just doing some sort of mediumship, whether it's automatic writing, you can't have two people doing automatic writing.
Hmm.
So if you are using the board by yourself, I would just say, maybe a daytime setting somewhere where you're not feeling that there's a negative atmosphere and you're really just kind of focusing on what it is that you want to ask. I also tell people, don't focus on trying to communicate with a loved one that's passed on, because what I have learned is you're not always going to get that. And it's not a bad thing. It's just your teachers and your spirit guides or your aliens or your earthbound guides are going to come to you and, try to communicate with you, whoever it is that's available at the time. And it's not always a loved one. Sometimes they do move on into other realms, and you don't want to ask for that and then invite something else in. I don't look at it like it would be demonic. I think a lot of people would think it was demonic if it wasn't nice or friendly. But really, it's like introducing yourself to a new friend. Would you walk up to someone that you didn't know that you just met and make fun of them and laugh and carry on? Probably not. So the first time I would tell people, if you feel like you want to use it with someone, that's perfectly fine. I've read somewhere that you should never use it alone in the dark in front of a mirror. I don't really think that matters. I've
When
used mine in many different capacities, but it's all about your intention behind it and what it is that you're asking and how respectful you are. So if you're going to use it, um, just try not to have a negative mindset. It's like people that drop hallucinogens. You always hear them talking about not being in a negative mindset when you do it, or you'll have a bad trip. So that's the best way I can kind of describe it, is you don't really want to have a bad trip using the Ouija board. You want to have a good positive experience. So it's really just about your attitude. If you're feeling depressed or angry or moody that day, that's probably not the best time to start using a spirit board or even doing automatic writing or tarot for that matter. So when you start using the board, I would just simply say, hey, maybe light some candles, light some incense, play whatever music makes you puts you in a good mindset, a happy mood, positive, and then just kind of go from there. You can slowly ask questions. You can introduce yourself
hmm
just like you would to someone that you didn't know. And then just kind of wait and see what happens. They don't always move right away. It's not like in the movies where it's like, like you're not going
did
to see it
you
fly across the room because you said, oh, is anyone here? That's fine to ask. I've had people say things like, are you negative or positive? I wouldn't even really go there either. I would just simply ask the question, you introduce yourself. If nothing's happening, you say thank you and you put it away and maybe try a different day. Um,
Did you find that you reconnect with a particular spirit when you work with with any spirit board, and does it change based upon the spirit board that you work with? Or do you connect with other spirits, or is there just usually one entity that you
there's
know?
one main one. Um, and that's because it came with the board when I first started using the board. I've gotten other Ouija boards since then, and I've had some lighter spirits, maybe spirits that didn't come off as being as knowledgeable as the original board that I've had. And I use those sparingly. I kind of made a joke that like one is for work questions, one is for, my finances at home, and the other one is for like all of the dreams and fantasies I have. Like, is this going to happen? There's always some kind of like for in my mind it's like compartmentalizing it all.
Hmm.
But there's people that would say this is all in your head anyway. If it is great, to me at this point of my life, I'm 45 years old. I've been doing it for almost 25 years, and I don't look at any of it as a negative thing, and I don't see it as anything other than the outside force that it is, unless I am just really that damn good at predicting things on my own. So
There's so many questions that I want to ask. I don't even know where to begin.
you're fine.
It, did you have, when you first started out, kind of a seminal moment that let you know that you're truly connecting with something that is not physically present?
Correct. Yeah. Um, so when I started using my Ouija board, I was 22 years old, almost 23. I had been watching a lot of John Edwards, do his gallery readings on his TV show. And at the time, I was really infatuated with the idea of being able to communicate with my late grandmother, my mom's mom.
Hmm.
And at the time, I was just going through some stuff with work and I really missed her. And I had a crush on this guy. And it was just like, I just had so many questions. And I happened to get really sick about 3 weeks before a trip I was taking to Jacksonville, Florida, to see my sister and my niece and my brother-in-law and my nephew. And I got so sick that I passed out and hit my head in the doorway, like right here. And I mean, it would have been painful had I not passed out. I had the flu that bad. I was getting up to run to the bathroom. I'm thinking I can make it back to the bed before I like pass out. No, I passed out. And I was staying with my parents at the time, and my dad comes rushing out and is like, I don't know, his tidy whities where he was sleeping in his bed, and he's running out like, what the hell's going on? And I'm like laying there like, oh my God, like it's like the worst case scenario. It's like so embarrassing. And so picked me up, my mom was like worried. She'd called the doctor, worried I had a concussion. I'm like, Mom, I'm fine. I didn't even really have a bruise on my forehead, but it was like right here where my third eye is. Whether or not it's related, I don't know to this day, but I
Wow.
always thought it was strange. I'm
Well,
highly skeptical, even though all of these things have been happening to me most of my life. I'm just like, whatever, I'll think about it later. Well, until I go on shows like this, and then I'm thinking about it. So time to talk about it. But so fast forward to a couple of weeks later, I was on an airplane going to Jacksonville, and it was one of those flights that are terrifying. There's so much turbulence. I thought the plane was gonna like crash. There was some really bad storms, but when they finally landed in Jacksonville, the storm had calmed. I get off that airplane. I'm like, I'm never flying again at this point. My sister takes me home or to the house where I was visiting. And as soon as we walk in, my then 11-year-old niece, at the time she was 11, set, starts telling me about, hey, I started using a Ouija board. She's like, I got to show this to you later. I'm like, all right, all right, all right. You show it to me later. Yeah, I'm talking to the neighbor, and the neighbor was there, and turns out to be the same person that showed me how to use the Ouija board later on. But she had one, and my niece knew about it, and so she wanted to be like our next door neighbor Annette, and so she wanted one, and so her and her best friend had been playing with it. And so later that night, it's probably about 11 o'clock. It's quiet, and my niece is like, "Will you please come and play this board with me?" And I kind of laugh. I'm rolling my eyes. I'm like, "Okay, whatever." And I sit down with her, and it's kind of moving, but I'm like, it's her. She's 11. Like, I'm just gonna play off like I think she's not moving it. So I'm like, okay, okay, okay. I know. I believe it. I believe it. And she's like, I'm telling you, this is so real. She said, me and my friend were playing with it in the bathroom in the dark, and this man's face appeared in the mirror, and she's freaking out. And she's like, "That's so cool." And I look at her and I say, maybe you shouldn't be playing with this. If you're seeing weird things in a mirror, like maybe you should put that away. And so I don't think anything of it. But the next morning, I get out of bed and there's no one in the house. It's just me. And I was watching my niece and nephew that day. I was actually visiting to help out my sister. And so I was visiting there for 2 weeks to kind of be like a nanny for my niece and nephew. I get up before everyone because I want coffee. I'm an early bird. And I go to make coffee. I see the Ouija boards laying on the table. And something in me, I don't know what it was that morning, it was like, you know what? Let's see. Let's see if this actually works. So this is stupid. Let's see if this works. So I pick it up, I dust it off. She was like, "Oh, you have to wipe it down." I don't know who told her all these things, but some of these things that she told me to do, I never do any of those now. So I'm like wiping it down. I go to sit on their sofa and everything's quiet. And I put my hands on the planchette and I didn't know what to ask. I just said my name and I said, "Can you help me?" And I always get really emotional with this part because it's like no one believes you. You know, you tell someone the story and they're not going to believe you. But all of a sudden, I felt it move so quickly. It was like something out of like a horror movie. Like I felt my arms jerk, like something was pulling me. And I know it wasn't me, I was by myself. And I was like, whoa. And in that immediate moment, I started bawling my eyes out. I don't know why. I just started crying. And I think it was because in that moment, it was like, wow, there is a God. Because how is this working if there isn't? And so for me, it was a very spiritual experience. Some people will look at it differently, like, oh my God, it was probably a demon. You know, some of these people that don't think you should be touching any of that stuff. But from that moment on, I was like, oh shit, this is really working. And so that was my moment.
You mentioned that it moves. When you are working with a spirit board by yourself, is it typical that your hands kind of get dragged along?
They do when they shake a little bit. It's like if there is a message that's coming through very quickly, and the message will come through very, very quickly sometimes, and your hands like almost wobble, kind of like someone that has like MS, or I forget what you call it, or like they shake, but it's almost like your hands do that a little bit. And that's not me, and that's not some kind of muscle thing. And it's only happening when I'm using the board sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And then in those moments, I have to say, slow down. I understand it's coming through, whether it could be like a new spirit coming through or, some other kind of earthbound entity. And I'm just like, calm down, and give me the answer. Um, but that's one of the things that I hate using the Ouija board with people. I don't like to use it with someone else anymore because I'm so used to that feeling. Like I can't trust whether or not someone else is actually doing it. That, and when you've been doing it as long as I have, you start hearing the answers in your head before they show up on the board. It's very quick. It's like boom, 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 and it's there. And like I said, I'm a visual person. I like to look at it. And so that's why I like automatic writing. I'm a writer naturally. So for me, that's my best way to, like, if you're communicating with me, that's probably the best way you're going to communicate with me. And the same thing goes for messages. You have to write that down. Like you have
Mm-hmm.
to put it in writing, or I have to see the letters spelled out for me. It's like when you yell at someone, you say, "Do I have to spell it out for you?" Yes, you do have to do that for me.
Yes, quite
So,
literally.
yeah.
Did you ever find it moving by itself without you
No,
touching it?
no.
Okay, so and what I'm trying to do is discern and help people understand some of the difference between Hollywoodism
Mhm.
and real life.
Yeah.
Now, my understanding is to say there is a proper technique to use when using the spirit board, as in opening and closing and things like that.
Right.
What are those?
Well, like I said before, you have to ensure you're not attracting anything negative. It's the same thing if you go out, this is the thing. It's not rocket science. It shouldn't be some kind of thing you have to write down for people. It's no different than when you go out and you meet someone and say it's a blind date. you know like there's a protocol. Hi, how are you doing? You have a nice conversation. Okay, well, have a good evening, however you say goodbye, and then you end it and it's over. It's the same thing with a board. If you want to have a positive experience, whatever makes you serene and chill out, because one of my biggest rules is learn to breathe. It's okay to breathe. Don't be so afraid that you can't do it. And honestly, if you're that afraid of it, use a different form of divination. Don't use a Ouija board. I'm never here to advocate using them to anybody. I think that's another thing that people think is if you're going to do it, therefore you must be trying to make everyone do it. No, I don't care if you want to use a Ouija board. That's on you. You do you. But when you're sitting down, you want to have a nice atmosphere. I like to burn incense. I like to play soft music. I like to light candles. Um, Maybe I wear something comfortable so I'm not like uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
So like not tight clothing. And this is more for me, but I think a lot of people will find, if they're going to do any form of divination or meditation, being able to relax a little bit before you start the process. I would say have a notepad and a piece of paper. Write down the question that you have and then start asking. Start off with just simple yes or no. I wouldn't advise trying to spell things out. It's going to take you a while to get that energy moving. If you work with the same spirit that keeps coming through, that's even better because then you don't have to worry so much about random things happening while you're doing it. It's a clear and concise message, and you can ask them. If you're not um, going to be able to be clear and concise at this moment, I will come back later. Kind of like I said with the date. If it's not working out, what do? Do you end it or you just sit there? And it's kind of like the first time you use a Ouija board, it's almost like a job interview.
Mm-hmm.
There's a series of questions that are asked, and you can really honestly, there's going to be a million people on the internet that are going to give you a million different answers. Um, but if you're going to do it, like I said, have a nice place that you can do it quietly, have a pen and paper, breathe. Um, just make sure that, whatever it is that you're doing, you thank it and you can say goodbye or have a good evening. You don't have to make sure the planchette spells out goodbye because they don't care. It's you that really the connection has to just be ended however you want it to be ended. If you say, "Hey, um, I need to go now," whatever, thank you, have a nice evening, that's fine too. It doesn't have to just be I have to say goodbye like it's some sort of formal spell because it's never been that way with me. And there's some people on the internet, and I've watched some other people that do Ouija board work or spirit board work, and they have all these lists of things to do. For me, just simply having an introduction, a nice conversation, and a conclusion. You can record on your phone if you want. You have the where you can record your voice on your phone. You can record the session by video. That's perfectly fine if you want to go back to it later and look at it. But whatever is working for you, each person is going to have a different personality, just like each spirit or entity that you come across is going to have a little bit of a different personality also. So you just kind of go with it. But I've been doing it so long, I kind of know when it's a different personality than the one I've been dealing with for 20 years. Then I always know I'm like, okay, who are you? But you might change it up a little bit. But
That makes me think to ask a question. What do you do if you run into a combative spirit or a spirit that's not so pleasant? How do
I'll
you
give you a
handle
perfect
that?
example. So my mother was adopted by her aunt. So my grandmother that I wanted to communicate with before, a very nice woman, took my mother in because her sister couldn't care for her children. They went to live with relatives most of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So my biological grandmother was not the nicest person. And one day I forget where I was at. Might have been my bedroom at my old house. I'm using a board, but it wasn't a physical board. I was using the Cryptique board online that they used to have where you could use the Ouija board on the computer. Like you use your mouse was the planchette and I was kind of playing around with it. And this very negative, um, I'll say twitchy woman came through and spelled out her name for me, but she spelled it backwards. And I said, okay. Her name was May, and it was like YAM. I'm like, yam. What is yam? Then I was like, oh God, yeah, like May. And so she's going on about how all men are a piece of crap. And because I was originally asking a question about somebody I was dating at the time. And I was just kind of messing around with this. And I get that's you're wasting your time. They're all a waste of time. You should focus on this, this, and this, and stop wasting your time with that. None of them are any good. And I'm like, you said May. I'm like, that makes sense. Because my biological grandmother had a series of bad boyfriends, I think three different husbands, one of them beat her. So, I mean, I can understand her attitude was saying, you don't need a man, you need to go do something else. But her whole attitude was always negative. She was
Mm.
never mean to me. I didn't see weird things come out of the closet, but it was her attitude. It just really was a downer. And so when that happened, I just kind of quit. I kind of would have to push it away or change the subject and maybe ask about something else. And it was always nice to me about me, but if I asked about any males in my life, it was a no-go on that. You were not going to her for love advice.
Is there a way that you would quickly shut a reading down if
Yeah,
it came across and it
you,
was like absolutely horrid that just made you sick to your stomach?
um, there was only one time that that borderline happened to me where the board was telling me to get out. And that was when I had first started using the board. And I'll be honest, when I realized that it worked, I was using it so much that it actually became obsession, not possession, but like I was obsessed with using it.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally had a spirit just go, get out, like, get out, stop doing this. And it really freaked me out. And so I ended up turning the board over when I put it back in the box and I put sea salt over it. And then I just kind of left it there for about 5 days before I took it back out. And this was at the insistence of a friend of mine who had been using them for, I don't know, at that point, 40 years of her life. And she said, sometimes that happens. She's like, it's not a bad thing. She was like, but just sometimes they don't want to talk or they get irritated or, something different might come through. And it's just all about how you handle it. Now, if I had handled that differently, um, it might have ended differently. But I've never met anyone in my personal life that has used a board and then had psychic attacks or demons living in their closet afterwards. It's not, I mean, it's fun to write about as a horror writer. My imagination goes all over the place. I've even had a board help me with an idea here and there a few times about how to scare people. But it's just, it's not something that happens a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think that certain people, if you believe in reincarnation a little bit, I think that some people are reincarnated into learning some type of lesson. And so maybe they do have these things happen to them because there's some kind of lesson there that they need to learn, and a lot of times it makes someone stronger by having something like that happen to them. It's a spiritual thing, I think. And, if someone's being attacked spiritually, it's not just all voodoo dolls and creepy things crawling under your bed. Sometimes it's just simply the people you encounter in your everyday life, and sometimes these entities can attract those things into your life. I was told for years, like, you're playing with the Ouija board. That's probably why your job sucks, and it's like, okay. I quit talking to people about it after that. I think this is probably the first time I've really talked about it in a long time, talking this openly about it because I don't anymore. People are either very freaked out or they just want to know what it can tell them, but they don't want to be the one to touch it. They want you to do it for them.
And that's one of the biggest reasons that I wanted to talk to you about all of this, because people have such a misconception.
Mm-hmm.
Hollywood again has run rampant and created
Right. Well, it's
some
fun. And
serious issues.
it sells tickets. Sells books.
Yeah. When you work with a spirit board and a group of people,
Mm-hmm.
would you say that there should be a limit to the number of people and only for precision?
Well,
That
I will
way.
be honest with you. I don't use my personal board. I have other ones that I can use for social interaction.
Mm-hmm.
I don't use my board for any of that. I never do. That's mine, and it's kind of like taking your kid out and being like, this is what a kid is supposed to look like. I don't take him out.
Right.
I have a board. I have a couple of boards that are just for that. They're larger, or you can make one on the table. Maybe using some pieces of paper on a table if you're doing like a seance type thing. You can tape some letters down on the table and then just have, one or two people kind of move like a planchette, like a larger one, or some kind of a glass, and just kind of do that. But like, I don't, a Ouija board itself, they're very small. So when you see the boards, like when they have like five kids using I don't know how they can do that like comfortably, because that's not comfortable. Like even with two people, it'll drive you crazy because like elbows and things get in the way. But if you have a nice size board or like a tabletop board, then yeah, you can probably do that with like more than two people. But two people, if it's just a single board, is probably the max. Maybe three at the most, but it's going to be very uncomfortable. And you should really be using both hands on that planchette so you can feel the energy. If you use one hand, it's real lopsided and you have no idea where the energy is going. But to make it flow nicer, you should always use two hands.
Mm.
Or if you're by yourself, you can hold the board underneath, and it's kind of like, you're pancaking it in or sandwiching it in between your two hands. So when you're moving the planchette, the board is in the middle and you're holding it up with your hand, but like probably close to your lap area. But as far as how many people, it's not even so much about the energy. For me, it's just always been physically annoying to have that many people try to use a board. But if you're having more than two people in that, you can switch off. Maybe there's, five or six people in the room, that's fine. Maybe two people are using the board, and then maybe you switch it up, and then try to go from there if you're trying to ask questions for everyone. But I
Would
don't,
you
yeah.
would you tell people that there are things they should do or should not do in
For
using a
me,
spirit board?
I always tell people never ask to talk to a loved one. Like, don't ask for specifics right away. Sometimes that can grow um, later on, but I don't believe that everyone that passes on is watching over you either. I think a lot of times it's a wonderful Hollywood movie to think that, but I think that some people, when they do pass, they do kind of cross that bridge and go to the light immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have some guides that can kind of, communicate messages, but they may not be the person that's actually communicating that message themselves. So that's why I always tell people to be careful with that. There's an intermediate person, working in between the two, and that's how you can sometimes get messages, and how they sometimes, if you're even if you're just doing tarot and you get a message and it seems kind of like half of the message, or something isn't quite clear, that's how you can kind of see when it's not from the direct person that you're asking that message to. And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't really ask directly, like, hey, can I talk to my father? Um, I did have him come through the night that he passed away, but it freaked me out and I didn't really want to talk to him because I'm like, this is not where I want to talk to you. Like, this is amazing that you came through after you passed, but this is not, like, please don't come here for that. It wasn't like, I mean, I appreciate it. I'd rather it be in a different way, send me a sign, play a song on the radio, but being on the Ouija board, it's a different, because you get so many, it's like a party sometimes, you're getting so many different personalities. And then sometimes you just have one that stays with you for a very long time. But the rule that I always, like, I will die on this hill, is do not ask to speak to someone in particular. And that is a hill I will die on. Um, and to be able to relax. That's one of my other rules. Relax, like, calm down. I'm not an advocate for getting trashed or anything before you use the spirit board, but if you need to, chill out or take your medicine or a half a Xanax to just relax, or a hot bath, that's fine. I mean, don't be trashed while you're trying to communicate with spirits, but be relaxed, be in a relaxed state of mind, be open so you can be open to it. If your anxiety is getting to you so bad, I probably would just tell someone, if it's that bad, don't do it at all. Have someone else to communicate and do it for you.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but the relaxation, that's a big one. That's definitely a big one for me. Because if I'm not relaxed, even the messages don't come through properly.
Did you ever work with someone else in using a board
Mhm.
to the point where information that you received was either so accurate or so on point that the other person kind of freaked out.
Once, I had a friend, we decided to go to a graveyard, and it was probably right around my birthday. I was born in October, so it was around my birthday. Excuse me. And I said to her, you know what, let's see if we can pick up any messages that are different from the ones I get all the time,
Mm-hmm.
from the same, like any different personalities rather. And so we had went to this little graveyard over in Akron, I forget the name of it. And it's one of those like real old ones where it's real tiny and it's small. So there are probably like maybe 20 people buried there. And I knew there wouldn't be a lot of cars driving by. It was kind of late in the afternoon in the fall, and it was probably just about to get dark within the hour. And we're sitting there, and it had said something about one of the boyfriends that she was, or one of the guys that she was dating at the time. And then it said, I don't like you. Get off of this board. And after it happened, she was like, I knew your board didn't like me. It's I was like, oh my God, stop. I said, it's probably just trying, like, they have a sense of humor too. And if they think that you're afraid of it, they probably will mess with you a little bit. That's just, it's, it's a given.
Mm-hmm.
But like the accuracy of what it had told her at the time, and I'm sorry, Mike, I don't remember what specifically it was at the time, but it was just something so accurate about, I think it was something about someone calling her that she hadn't talked to in a couple of weeks, and it gave the day and the time. That person was going to contact her. And sure enough, it happened because she calls me later and she's like, I'm never getting on your board again. She's like, I'm never going with you anywhere. I was like, okay. But I was in my 20s back then. I wouldn't do that now.
You mentioned earlier, do you use your board often now, or do you find that life is a little too busy to do so on?
I do. I would say I probably use mine once a week, at the most. Sometimes more. I think it's, when I recently just started a new job about 6 months ago. So when I first started that, when I was going on my breaks, because I work from home, I was using my board just to see, am I going to make it through the day today? Like, is this going to be like, is there any messages? Can you tell me anything about this I need to be doing? Because I didn't feel connected to any part of it when I first started.
Uh-huh.
And so it was helpful for that, like I call it, there's one board that I use that's like my life lessons board. So anytime I have some real serious things happen, I usually will use that board because it's very like fatherly type board, and it gives you like fatherly advice, and I guess is the best way to describe it. And so that's one that I keep in my upstairs in my house. I keep it under my bed. So
What would be, and I know that we've covered quite a few things, but
yeah.
what would be two or three things that you would tell people do not do this particular thing? As you
Don't make fun
mentioned,
of it. Like, don't make fun of it. Don't get mad if it doesn't tell you what you want it to tell you.
hmm
They're not going to tell you what you want to hear. They're going to tell you what you need to hear. I joke all the time that a Ouija board is like going to the meanest psychic on the planet. They're going to give you all the information. And don't ask when you're going to die. That's stupid. They're not going to tell you the answer. They might tell you how you might pass away, but it's always vague. But don't make fun of it. Don't ask how you're going to pass away. Because it's more like just live your life. My board always tells me when I'm having like a day, be okay. So I would tell you just be okay. um, that's it's not. I mean, there's certain things that I've learned over the years with my board, and some of it's just so bizarre. I mean, if you want to go into weird stuff, Mike, I could tell you some real weird stuff, but I don't think your audience really cares to hear any of that. But there are just some certain things, they speak their own language. And after a while, you start to understand what they're trying to tell you.
hmm
It's like if you've ever seen someone that might have a parent from another country, or they might have a real thick accent, and the first time you meet this person, you're like, I had no idea what they were saying. I had no clue. But then after a couple of years, you're like, oh, he's saying he wants some pizza, and it's like you had no idea that's what they were saying the first time you met him. It's very much like that when you're using a Ouija board.
it's
Um,
one thing I would ask, and personal experience, there is no perfect divination or communication tool. It does not exist. We can get kind of close
Hmm.
with spirit boards, tarot cards, working
Right.
as a psychic, a medium. We can get close, but there is nothing that is perfect. So when people are asking questions, I would it be fair to say, don't make the question so precise and so pointed that you are trying to arrive at one single answer?
Yes, because when you're asking for advice,
Hmm.
you know. There are some people, I know a woman, good friend of mine, who always says going to a psychic is like getting, a cheap uh, hour of therapy or 15 minutes of therapy. And to be honest, sometimes because I've used my board for so long and it knows me very well, if I'm having a bad day, I'll pick my board up. This, like I said, it's weird. I'll pick my board up and I'll just give it a hug and be like, man, I really need a hug today. And it's so weird because it's like, but I work from home, I'm remote, I'm by myself all the time. Just some backstory here. So it's like, sometimes you're just like, I just need to feel something, or, I hug my dog, but it's like sometimes you just need to feel like you're connected to something.
Hmm.
And that's not a bad thing. There's a lot of people that they gravitate towards what you and I do because, they need to feel some kind of connection to something. Whether, and sometimes traditionally, like traditional religion just doesn't cut it. And so there's other outlets. I mean, I tell people all the time, I never felt closer to God than when I started using a Ouija board and I felt that damn thing move. My hands moved. Like I didn't move it. I could feel it being
Hmm.
moved. It's like I know it was no one else was there with me. And it's like the best testimonial you'll never hear in church. It's like, I was using a Ouija board and I was talking to God. It's like, come on. It's like when you do get some very, it's funny in a way, but you do feel very connected to it. And sometimes I get really defensive about Ouija boards because you'll hear a lot of bad stuff. And I just roll my eyes. I get so irritated over it because I know better. I've been doing it for so long. And if I have something I've never encountered, I'll call my friend who showed me how to use the board the first time. And her lesson, I tease her all the time, it wasn't the greatest lesson. She's just like, you just got to rub it and put your energy on it and then just ask the question and just wait. It was very like brief. I still tease her about that because it was just such a brief lesson. There was no, don't do this in the dark. Don't sit in front of a mirror. Don't do this. And it's like, oh, okay. You know, and even if she was on your show, she'd tell you the same thing. It's just all about what makes you feel comfortable and what you're gravitated towards. If you're real into heavy metal and that relaxes you, then sure, play some heavy metal while you're using your Ouija board. And probably don't want it blasting, in your ears, but whatever chills you out, that's perfectly fine. You're going to have better messages that come through. And if you're just open to seeing what they say, a lot of times your entire life will change. And my whole entire life changed in that one moment. That the board was just like, yeah, I can help you. It was like, whoa, because your whole perspective on things changes. It was almost like if someone that's finally, someone that's been really depressed or had a really bad physical ailment and they get that one medication that just changes their helps them out so much that it changes them forever. It was kind of like that with the board for me. It was like a spiritual correction, I guess is the best way to put it, because before that it was kind of all over the place. I didn't really know what I was supposed to be doing with any of my spirituality. And it's not like Ouija board worship or anything, just being able to see things in a different way so that it helps you understand the universe.
Now,
And you can
you
get real deep just by saying that. But if you understand what I'm saying when I say that, it's it can really it can move you into ways that you would have no idea. It can take a very angry person and make them a nicer, happier person. And I think that's in a way what it did for me when I was finally able to say, oh, there is something else out there. There is hope.
you mentioned something, and
Excuse
I'm
me.
curious. You said to help see things in a little bit of a different way. When
Mhm.
you are using your board, do you ever get pictures that come across in your mind's eye that coincide or are part of what you're doing with the spirit board? As in, are you shown things? Or is that.
Sometimes. But for me, it's similar to, if you're reading a book and
Hmm.
you get the visuals in your head. But sometimes, like I said, when I'm using the board, the message is coming through to me before I even see it, like like with the letters or even showing up under the planchette. Um, so, maybe it's like, hey, your friend Bob is going to be at the grocery store. And before it spells grocery store, like, oh, grocery store bread, he's going to get bread, or, and this is when this is going to happen to him. It's precise in a weird way. And then in another way, it's like, you don't need to know all of that. And I think one of the messages, and you could probably testify to this, and anyone that has done any kind of light work, dark work, whatever, when you're doing something like this, you know, you have to have a certain level of expectation, but at the end of the expectation, you have to know that there's a limitation to it. Like, I'm not going to go into it um, hard-hearted, I don't want to be like that. But as you're delving more into some of the things that you can do with it,
Hmm.
like what's the word I'm looking for? Clear of mind. You're learning something about yourself. You're learning something about others. And it's never going to be the same thing twice in most cases. And that's another thing I keep telling people. It's like you have a different perspective on things. And the more that you do it, you understand why you're not supposed to know everything, because knowledge is power, and power is it can be deadly. So like the more information, that's what I was trying to get to. It's like the more information they don't want you to know everything. You're not supposed to know everything. If everyone knew everything, it's like the people like, oh, can you use Ouija board to get the lottery numbers? Ho, ho, ho. No, no, not everyone's supposed to win the lottery for a reason.
Right.
It's, not everyone is going to have that experience. All of our experiences are different for a reason. And, if you think about it, the more you know sometimes about someone, that's a deadly combination.
Hmm.
The more you see, and like I've seen some things, like my board I used to joke all the time, my board likes to gossip about my neighbors. It would be like, oh, well, so and so's cheating on this. You're going to hear about this soon. First off, I didn't ask about that. I was just here for messages. Thank you. That's amusing, but I'm going to put it away and come back later. Or my board always had this thing where it would say, I'm going to go shopping now because I didn't want to answer a question I was asking it. And I would say, okay, you're going shopping. Got it. All right. Because you're not supposed to know everything. Your mind can only bend so much. Shouldn't know everything.
Yep. I'm going to segue a little bit out of this because I have a couple of other questions that I want to ask you, and I know our time is kind of flitting away. You write horror stories,
Hmm.
yes? And you're published and you do a lot of work on social media or YouTube.
Yeah.
How much, I don't want to say the information, what kind of influence has the Spirits Board been on your writing?
Well, there's a few things. I know a lot about Ouija boards. One of my most successful books that I had was about a girl using a Ouija board and befriending a ghost to get back at her best friend who was a bully. And it was like a kind of a YA story. It's called Wicked William. Um, and it's one of those things where I know enough about the board to kind of incorporate my own experiences in it, and I think it makes for a better story.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I can heighten it, obviously, and do that whole Hollywood thing where crazy things are happening. Because you have to be able to tell a story that, especially a horror story, it's action, 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 or sometimes, it's you have to be able to set a mood. And I can do that very well when it comes to Ouija board things. Some of my other horror ideas are just ideas. Some of it, sometimes I wonder, like, I'll write some things, I'll write a story, and the next day I'll go back and read it. I'm like, I don't even remember writing that. Was I channeling this whole story? Like, It's like, thanks, but okay. And
Yeah.
it's like, 'cause people say, where do you come up with this weird stuff? I'm like, I don't know. My brain's crazy. But when you're using, when you have that spirituality that, spooks everyone out, it's kind of like I got an inside. I know what's going to freak you out even more. And I do remember writing a chapter in that book, Wicked William, and I was like, I got to get out of this thing. How am I going to get rid of this particular situation? You write yourself in a corner sometimes. And so I put it away. And the next day I got out and I used my board. I'm like, what are we going to do with this person? Can you help me with this? And it was just kind of a couple ideas here and there. And I was like, ah. And it was like, goodbye. After it gave me a couple ideas, and it was like, there you go. Have fun with that. Because it just kind of gives you, it was almost like piggybacking, and I'm not like a patient's worth where I'm like writing entire books
Mm-hmm.
using my spirit board. It's not like that for me at all. Um, I wouldn't even say that was her using Ouija board. I think patient's worth the spirit, or, I think that was just channeling. That was automatic writing.
Mm-hmm.
But, it gives you some great ideas. And then when I do watch movies that have Ouija boards in them, I love them. I love all of them. Um, I can tell you that when I was 8 years old and I saw Witchboard for the first time, I never in a million years thought I would ever touch a Ouija board after watching that movie, and here I am. So yeah, for whatever reason, it's like, oh hey, Spirit's like, you know what, we're gonna give her this as a tool. Yeah, we're gonna give this to her. She'll love it.
See,
It's like, come
I'm
on.
of the age that the biggest thing when I was a kid was The Exorcist,
Hmm.
and the girl got possessed because she was working with a Ouija board or playing with one.
Hmm.
And I think that's where a lot of people, unfortunately, got the wrong connotation.
Right. Well, the true story behind it, was a little boy originally, and it was the aunt who introduced him to what you would call spiritualism.
Mm-hmm.
And she had shown him a Ouija board, and he was using it. He was probably under the age that kid. I would probably not encourage my children to use a Ouija board, um, because even at that young age, you're very impressionable. And I think it's possible that you can, bring forth something. I do, but I also think it's you are going to attract things to you that are like you.
Mm-hmm.
And your fear is going to attract your worst fears to you. And having that mindset, this little boy is using this board, or, even Reagan in the movie, she's using this board, and then all of a sudden something happens and she's freaking out a little bit. The mom's kind of like got this, once you bring kind of that negativity, you're fair game to anything that's dark. Something that's dark is going to get you regardless of what tool you're using. She
Mm.
could have been using a tarot deck, or, he could have been using automatic writing in some paper, or he could have been using like the yes no game with a pencil on a table. It's like it could be anything, because in your mind, once you have that focus that you are wanting to connect with something, you're going to allow yourself to be opened up and connect to it. It's not the board, it's probably not anything else. It's you. You are the conduit.
And
So,
that's something that a lot of people, they either forget or they don't pay attention to.
yep.
The
Hmm.
fact that if they are angry, they're going to attract more of that energetic when using any divination tool or when doing any kind of spiritualism. When they're happy, that's the side that they connect with. You know, when they are sad, lonely, things like that, that's what they bring. And I agree with you. That's exactly what they draw to them.
Right.
Tell me one other thing.
Hmm.
Where can people A find your written work?
It is kbhurst.com. And you can, I also have a link tree. It's KB Hurst Writes on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe my link tree is the same one, but you can find all of my information on my kbhurst.com. It's got all of my information right there. All my stories, my books, my
If
link to my YouTube channel.
I was going to say, if people go to Amazon and
Hmm.
look up KB Hurst, will they be able to find your
Yes.
written works there?
Yes. I have 2 books for sale, and then I have 3 short stories on there that,
Okay.
yeah, and one
You,
series that I'm trying to get off the ground. I have, you have a lot of work in progresses when you write, and I have 5 things
yeah.
going on right now. So, and a full-time job.
You mentioned a YouTube channel.
Hmm.
If people go to YouTube, they would be able to look for KB Hurst and find
Yes,
you,
it's
or
on YouTube. When I put it on there, because I was doing interviews similar to this for a while. So it's actually KB Hurst and her menagerie on YouTube, and you can find that. And you can link to it from my website also.
perfect.
Yeah, it's where I narrate my own scary stories.
You narrate and you also mix to video, correct? So
Yes.
you have a visual story, a visual presentation as you go.
Yes. Like a miniature movie almost. Yeah.
Curiosity,
Yeah.
when you narrate your work,
Hmm.
do you find that it comes across better because you were the one that wrote the material and you know
Yeah.
exactly what is trying to be conveyed, what
Yes,
emotion?
because I think if you're narrating someone else's work and you mess up a word, you're like, I have to start over again. If I mess up a word, I can just make it something the character said. So that's nice. I'll have to keep re-recording. I will do 1 or 2 recordings
Uh-huh.
of one of my stories before I get it right. But on the very rare occasion, I get that sucker right the first time, and I'm like, export, I'm done, because I'm not trying to do anything else. And I've played around with writing my own music and using my own photography for thumbnails and pictures. I've done my own video, and I had to teach myself everything when it comes to that stuff. So I'm sure I'm not perfect,
Yeah,
but
wearing many hats to get things done. There's no doubt about that.
yes, I'm producer, I'm editor,
Uh-huh. Oh,
a
I know
lot.
that feeling all too well.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you can. Yeah.
Well, listen, I appreciate you taking time to join me this evening.
Absolutely.
Again, people need to do a little bit of research, as far as I'm concerned, about spirit boards. Are they
They
for
should.
everyone? No.
There's a woman, she's been on Coast to Coast AM. I think her name's Catherine. I cannot remember her last name. I think it starts with a D, and she's like me. She's been using board for a very long time, and she's not had a negative experience. She uses the board with someone else. I think it was her husband, like not physically, but like he'll write down the stuff that is coming across.
Hmm.
And she kind of uses it in a similar way. I think she's using hers more for research and writing. I have a friend that does a lot of channeling for her stuff, and she writes things down and posts little stickers on Instagram, little sayings of the day. But I mean, I can use mine for that, but I jokingly call it therapy. I'm just going to be honest.
I
Sometimes
know
it's
that
cheaper than
feeling.
going to pay someone else.
I know
Yeah,
that
I'm up to
feeling
like
too.
24 Ouija boards in my house now. So
Oh, wow.
I collect them. I get people give them to me all the time. I've had friends give them to me with no planchettes. I'm like, what happened to the planchette? They're like, I didn't even know that there was supposed to be one. I said, all right. So I have a stack of them in a closet somewhere. And what's funny is that almost all of them are the same 1972 Ouija board, like the Hasbro Ouija board that you see for like in all the movies from the 70s and 80s. It's that version. I have so many of that version. And the one that I have, I think I have 3 of them, and they're like 24 by 48. They're huge.
Wow.
And they're like these big things. Now, those you could probably have 5 people use at the same time. But yeah, you're not getting like the normal like size is about the size of a laptop. You're not having 5 people
Yeah, but
use
a two
that.
foot by 4 foot board,
Oh,
that's
it's
got to give you a
huge.
workout.
And they're heavy. They're not, I mean, they're still made out of like that heavy cardboard, but some of them have like almost like a metal, kind of like a little bronze around the edge of it where they're
Uh-huh.
nicely made. And they're just, they're creepier looking to me than the glow in the dark Ouija board that they had come out when I was a kid. Because this one has this dark blue phantom in the corner of the box, so it looks like a creepy phantom's watching whoever is using that board. And I'm like, no wonder they made so many horror movies with these things.
Mm-hmm. All
But
right. Well,
yes,
I really appreciate you taking the time this evening. Hopefully, people
absolutely.
have gotten a little bit of an education, have a little better understanding about it. Tell me again, where can people find your material?
kbhurst.com. So it's my writer's name, KB, and then Hurst is HURST.com.
Perfect. I appreciate it. We're going to catch up again, I know, because
Oh,
we've got other
yes.
things that we're going to be talking
Oh, yeah.
about.
Way more things to talk about, I'm
Oh,
sure.
absolutely. But until then, next time, I catch up with everybody on the next go round, the Blending Metaphysical. Thanks for watching.
Good evening.